Bonn Park is supported by Clean and Tidy Cleaning Services. Clean and Tidy is all about making life a little easier and less stressful for their clients. Serving Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, and surrounding areas, Clean and Tidy offers both residential and commercial cleaning services using safe, natural, and green products. Clean and Tidy supports Norwex, known as one of the safest brands on the market, to ensure homes and businesses are both clean and healthy. In addition to cleaning and dusting, the Clean and Tidy crew will also fulfill requests like making beds, washing and folding laundry, and vacuuming furniture. Shelby Bailing is the president and CEO of Clean and Tidy, and is the namesake of what her colleagues and clients call the Shelby Shine. She takes pride in the work that she and her crews do, and her company's commitment to avoiding harsh and harmful chemical cleaners. A truly clean environment, Shelby says, is a healthy and efficient one. To give your home or office the Shelby Shine, visit cleanandtidykw.com and book a free consultation. Bonn Park is supported by Guns Hill Artisan Cheese. Nestled within the rolling hills of Guns Hill Road in Oxford County near Woodstock, Ontario, Guns Hill Artisan Cheese is a slice of the Swiss Alps. That's where owner Shep Yosselstein learned the cheese-making techniques he now employs at Guns Hill. Shep and Colleen Bader have won countless awards for their cheeses, which are available in more than 300 locations around Ontario. Their cheeses are made from the milk produced at Shep and Colleen's family dairy farm, Frysville Farms. The farm was started by Shep's grandfather, who immigrated to the area in the 1950s from Holland and later passed his love and skills for dairy farming down 2 generations. A delicately aged cheese like their robust and nutty hand deck pairs beautifully with red wines like Pinot Noir or dark roasted beers, while others can be paired with your favorite fruit-based jellies. And you must try Five Brothers Smoked, which combines traits from Gouda and another Swiss variety called Appenzeller. After 1 year of aging, this creamy cheese is naturally smoked with maple and applewood, making for sweet overtones and a rich, smoky flavor. Oh, and Guns Hill Artisan Cheese makes small batches of hand-cut cheese curds that are perfectly squeaky with an immensely rich flavor, perfect for snacking or melted in a poutine. Need a gift basket? Guns Hill Artisan Cheese has many, or can custom design one made to order for any occasion. Birthdays, anniversaries, Valentine's Day, Easter, Christmas, or any other day you need the perfect gift. It takes decades of dedication to make cheese the traditional Swiss way. One taste and you'll realize the attention of quality makes all the difference. Visit them at gunshillcheese.ca and follow them on Instagram at Guns Hill Artisan Cheese. Bonn Park is supported by Reuter Roofing. Everyone needs a roof overhead, and Reuter Roofing knows the right way to put one there. Whether repairing a weathered roof or installing a new one entirely, Reuter Roofing has 20 years experience and countless satisfied customers around Waterloo region and beyond. Worried about the expense and challenge of getting your roof done? You don't need to worry with Reuter. They'll build a plan that fits your budget, and they won't pressure you into a new roof if your current one is worth repairing. If you do want to redo the roof, though, their installers will make sure the job is done efficiently and expertly the first time. Their job isn't done until you can rest easy under your roof. They help you protect your investment with maintenance programs and services like gutter protection, ice dam removal, and skylight work. We often take a roof for granted until something goes wrong. Reuter Roofing is there to fix problems and prevent future ones. Call Reuter Roofing today for your free estimate at 226-989-5897 or visit reuterroofing.ca, REUTERROOFING.ca. You can also follow them on Instagram at Reuter Roofing. With a focus on structural integrity, energy efficiency, and visual appeal of your roof, Reuter Roofing literally has you covered.
Welcome to Bonn Park.
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 Welcome to Bonn Park. I'm Sara Geidlinger.
And I'm Marshall Ward.
And today we have Marc Quaglia.
Marc is a gaming specialist at J&J Cards and Collectibles in Waterloo.
And actually, we just found out that he is a scientist and a science fiction writer. But we don't talk about that on this episode.
Right.
We just talk games.
Yeah, and nobody I've ever met knows more about games than Marc.
Marshall brought a game here to show, and he knew how much that box weighed.
Yep.
Gloomhaven.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about games for an hour.
Here's Marc Quaglia. Marc Quaglia, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We're very excited to talk to you.
I'm very excited to be talked to.
And I want to know how you and Marshall met.
So,
I like that. You're both starting at once.
No, Marshall first.
I met Mark at J&J Cards and Collectibles in Waterloo, and that's where he's a game specialist. And I've written a few articles where I've interviewed Mark about certain games, but I can't remember my exact first meeting with him, but I remember the first conversation where I was really, really intrigued by what he was talking about. And it was, I don't know why I brought up the game Monopoly, but Mark started talking about how Monopoly is actually not a really great game.
It's terrible.
I believe the exact phrase I use is unplayable trash.
Yeah. And it was like somebody just
But why do we all keep playing
awakened me to it, and everything he said made complete sense.
I found my people.
But it's almost like someone saying Coca-Cola and Pepsi aren't very good colas.
Right.
Like, I mean, I've never heard anybody talk about
So
say Monopoly is not a great game, but everything you said made so much sense.
Very briefly, the reason we all love Monopoly, and I'm going to have to use air quotes on a podcast, love Monopoly, is because we have very fond memories of having played it with people we like, and an opportunity to sit down with people we like and converse with them as we're getting our teeth kicked in is, for many of us, like our only opportunity to relate to our parents or to our family members. And so Monopoly has this space that it doesn't deserve of having really fond memories, even though the game sucks. And it's one of those things where I have a lot of people come into the store and they'll be like, "Hey, I love playing Monopoly." I'm like, "No,
do you?
No, you don't.
Do you?"
Yeah.
I had in my high school years, I had I had a gouge in my forehead about an inch and a half long for about 3 or 4 months. Because my nephews got so frustrated when we were playing Monopoly that one of them flipped the table and it turned into a wrestling match.
Yeah, I believe it. And it's one of those things where like that hurdle where so many people come in, they're like, "Well, I don't like complicated games." And what they really mean is they don't like long games. So Monopoly is not a complicated game, but it can last 5, 6, 12 hours.
Oh, I don't think we've ever finished.
Yeah, exactly. Risk is the same problem.
Right.
And so getting people out of that mindset of like, well, games have to be complicated to be fun, or they have to take hours, or it's going to be like kicking your teeth in. That's one of the joys of working in J&J's, because we have such a well-established customer base that they will trust that I'm not trying to foist the only most expensive garbage on them. We really want them to come back. And so there will be people who will be like, "Oh, can you show me where Risk is?" And I'm like, "Yes, if I absolutely have to, I will. But can I convince you to buy something better while we're on our way there," or whatever. I like that story that Marshall tells about how we first met. I remember the first time, I'm going to have to use air quotes again, meeting Marshall, was that he was talking to my boss, Jason, who's one of the owners at J&J's. And Jason, he's got his fingers in a lot of pies for the collectibles and card hobbies. And so he has to know a little bit about Magic. He has to know a little bit about, Lego and Playmobil. And he knows a little bit about board games. But I was listening to him talk and just mentally like, oh, I could fix so many of those things. And so when Jason approached me and says, "Oh, there's a reporter who would like to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and board games and all of that. Would you like to?" I mean, yes, I'd love to talk to him. Can I talk to him right now? Let's set it up. And so Marshall and I got a chance to chat, and it was great.
Yeah. So your job is that you're a game specialist.
Yeah, so my responsibilities in the store is to make sure that we have stock and basically to advise people either about the kind of games they would like, the kind of games they wouldn't like, or when people come in and they say, "Hey, I played this game once, it came in an orange box and it had the letter O in it." And then I'll be like, "Oh, you mean Dixit?" And like, "Yes, that doesn't have a letter O in it at all. How did you know?" That kind of thing.
Oh, that's awesome.
Okay, so that's a huge understatement, Sarah. Mark is a storyteller, and
we're all about storytelling.
And
here.
in the aisle where the games are, you should see the magic happening. Somebody will approach him. Mark might ask a question or two. Sometimes they have an idea of what they want, and to watch that unfold is incredible. And Mark, so for just an example, I might say I'm a big horror movie fan. Can you recommend a game that has a horror theme that I can play with my family?
Right.
And Mark introduced me to one of my favorite games of all time, Betrayal at House on the Hill.
Fantastic.
So Mark, pitch me this game and tell me how you would sell me this game.
Absolutely. So Betrayal House on the Hill is a subgenre that is called a trader mechanic game. So we're going to have a group of players, 3 to 6 people, and one of them has secretly been working against the best interest of everybody else. But when the game starts, we're a group of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed teenagers wandering into a haunted house. What could possibly go wrong? Nothing. Nothing could possibly go wrong. At some point during the game, there's an event called the Haunting. And the Haunting lets us know that one of us has been that traitor that's been working against everyone else. and what they have to do to win, but it also advises all of us what we have to do to win. And so having this moment of cinematic surprise where we're like, suddenly Marshall has actually been playing a vampire, a 1,000-year-old creature who's lured us all here because his ex-wife is also in the group. And now we have to protect the ex-wife while Marshall's trying to kill all of us. Or the house has sprouted wings and all of a sudden has leapt into the air. There's only one parachute left. It's in the basement. Whoever gets there first wins. Go. Those kind of moments, Betrayal House on the Hill does fantastic. Now, I normally couch that description by saying 1 out of every 4 or 5 games, unfortunately, because the rules are so simple and so elegant, it's just going to break. It'll be unwinnable or unlosable by no fault of your own, but just by the fact that the game has said, whoever's sitting closest to the doorway is the traitor, and that guy just happens to have all the guns.
Right.
Or, whoever gets to the basement first wins, and the good guys are already in the basement. There's nothing you can do to stop it. But the trade-off is that the other 4 or 5 times you play usually are such a cinematic experience that one failure isn't such a big deal. I should point out that because it's my job to advise people on these games, I always have complaints about everything. There's no such thing as a perfect game. There's no such thing as a perfect game for anybody. Even if I love Betrayal House on the Hill, and I do, it's not going to be a perfect game for everybody. But for somebody who loves those horror genres, that concept of those bright-eyed, bushy-tailed teenagers wandering around a haunted house, woo-hoo, it's great. And they just released a Scooby-Doo version of it. So if you have younger kids and you want to play the same game, but without those fangs, without that teeth element, but with the same kind of underpinning, why the heck not? It's great.
Without hideous, noxious fog coming
exactly.
into you, blood filling up a room.
Or giant tentacled monsters that are slowly consuming the house. Like, it's just, so good.
So what you just heard is Mark can do that with countless games.
I'm mesmerized. I love it. I feel like you must be very good at memorization and math.
You should see it.
And
So not only did I hear Mark basically tell me about that game, but I just marched right up to the front desk, and probably with a couple other games
Take
too.
my money.
Yeah, and I watch him do this pretty much anytime. I'm not that I'm standing watching him, but I mean I'll just be in the aisle, and so he's talking to one person, and then there's another person who listens in, and now there's 3 people listening, and you are a gift to J&J Cards and Games. And
if you could say that a little bit louder so Jason can hear you, just saying.
How do you get to be a board game specialist?
Well,
or game specialist? Tell me the title again, and I'll say it properly.
Board game specialist. But I mean, really, at the end of the day, I jokingly refer to myself as the vice president of board games because it's a company of 7 people. We're all vice presidents of something. Except for Jason, who's the vice president of everything. Anyways, there isn't really a defined way to do it. I did do some work for Snakes and Lattes, which is in Toronto. It has the honor of probably being the first, if not the first, board game cafe in Canada. It was founded by 2 French immigrants from France. I don't know if that's the right phrase. Anyways.
I think so.
Yeah. They came over and they decided that board game cafes were a thing in Europe. They should be in Canada. And so I worked a couple shifts at Snakes and Lattes doing exactly the same thing. But Snakes and Lattes wasn't a board game store. They were a board game space. And so it was my job to have people come down, sit at a table and be like, oh, what would you like to play? Let me teach you the game real quick. And as a result, I had to know the majority of the library pretty well. Not encyclopedically, but enough that I could be like, oh, this game is good if you like X. This game is good if you like Y, whatever. After that short stint, I had kind of an imagination for board games since I was very young. I, like many other people, have very fond memories of playing Monopoly, unplayable trash, and Risk with my brother, and chess and all that kind of stuff. And I was introduced to role-playing games, which are, storytelling, structured storytelling, where one person, usually me, would be in charge of like crafting an adventure, and everyone else would tell me how they'd react to those adventures. And so
for non-gamers, that's something like what Dungeons and Dragons would be?
Exactly.
Okay.
Dungeons and Dragons is so the hip phrase for it now is TTRPG, which is tabletop role-playing game.
I like it.
TTRPG, to differentiate it from digital role-playing games or like Skyrim or Final Fantasy or whatever. Will Wheaton is really big into that kind of thing, and there's been a lot of really renewed interest in Dungeons and Dragons and its associated role-playing games and storytelling elements, and a lot of board gaming has been trying to incorporate elements of that storytelling to make more evocative games. In the 80s, board gaming was very kind of about balance and trying to find ways to have a fair contest between players. So if the 3 of us sat down for a game of Puerto Rico, for example, Oh gosh, I wish I had picked a non-racist one. Let me think about that. Carcassonne. If the three of us sit down for a game of Carcassonne and played, the better player of us would probably win. Whereas if the three of us were sit down a game of Risk, whoever could roll more sixes would win.
Got
right?
it.
It's not
Okay.
really got skill in there. But the problem is that there wasn't much story associated with those games. And so in the 90s and going to the 2000s, the early noughts, theming and these kind of narratives of why the game's played, like Betrayal, House on the Hill, became really important to board game designers. And so trying to find games that told interesting stories became really important. And I just happened to be of the age that I wanted to play games that had really interesting stories with my friends. And so I got into some really big complicated ones and thought I was a super genius because I could play complicated games. And yeah, as we all know, complicated games are better. That's not true. That's not true at all.
No?
No, it's so the biggest repository of board game information on the internet is a place called Board Game Geek, BGG, Board Game Geek. It has 150,000 board games on database. It's constantly growing. It might be 155 or 160,000 now. I don't know. But every board game in existence, more or less, is on there. And they have a rating system where the people say, you know, how much you like a game. And currently the number one rated game of all time is a game called Gloomhaven. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later.
This is a very large box.
It's a very large
Gloomhaven.
box. It's 10 kilograms. It's 9.8 kilograms specifically of gaming goodness. But because it's number one on the rating scale, a lot of people will come into the store and be like, hey, I really love board games. Should I buy Gloomhaven? And I'm like, well, what's the most complicated game you've ever played? And they'll be like, oh, well, you know, I really love Settlers of Catan, or I love Carcassonne or Ticket to Ride. On a scale of 1 to 10 of complexity, Catan, Ticket to Ride, these really great family games, they usually land around a 3. Gloomhaven's around an 8, which doesn't sound like much of a hurdle, but really means that it's about 4 times more complicated than a game you've played before. So it would be like comparing, you know, simple algebra to higher end partial differential calculus. Like there's a big jump there, which is not to say it's not good, but it is to say that if you're expecting something as complicated as Catan, you're going to be disappointed.
You might not have fun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're going to be frustrated because the game takes an hour to set up. It's got a lot of rules. I played Gloomhaven 50 times, once a week, every week for every week of 2018 with my gaming group. And by the 50th playthrough, we were still getting rules wrong. Like
Right.
you just have to accept at some point, like, okay, well, we got the important ones right. We're not going to worry about the rest so much. But on Board Game Geek, it's rated number 1 because as humans, we feel smart when we understand complicated things.
For
And
sure.
So the rating system is really heavily biased towards complexity as quality. If a game is complicated and half decent, it will rate much higher than a very good game that's simple. So Crokinole, which is a Canadian classic,
We played it last night.
spectacular game, really good, clever, elegant. You know, a good design, a good game of Crokinole will give you as much pleasure as the most complicated board games on earth. And Crokinole's got 3 rules. Like, it is not a complicated game, but on Board Game Geek, it's, you know, it's well rated. I think it's like a 7 out of 10, 7.2, which is a perfectly respectable rating. But Gloomhaven is a 9.1. I wouldn't say Gloomhaven is intrinsically a better game than Crokinole. It's a very different
Difficult.
game.
Yeah. I would have thought Crokinole was on the low end.
It's so the lowest rated game on Board Game Geek, bar none, is Tic Tac Toe. So Tic Tac Toe
Okay.
is the lowest rated game in human history. There are games that are technically lower rated, but they have fewer ratings, so they don't really count. And that's with good justification. Tic Tac Toe is awful, but you know there are some really great games that are really simple. So stuff like, you know, Sushi Go, which is one of our best sellers every Christmas, or even Carcassonne or Catan. You know, these 3 out of 10 complexity style games can be enormously fun. However, usually after playing them, I don't know, 50, 60 times, which is a ton of playing them. But once you play them a lot, you kind of start looking for something else. And that something else can be additional complexity, or it can be speed or dexterity or weirdness. I usually jokingly tell the customers at J&J's that I play a lot of games. And so the ones that I love are the ones that are really weird, the things that do something so bizarre that no other game does. So Magic Maze, which is a fully cooperative game, everyone's on the same team, we're all working together, has a real-time element to it, where we're all playing to a 3-minute timer, and we've got 3 minutes to get to the next location or do the next thing, and we're all frantically trying to do our things. It's enormously fun, but I don't know if I'd recommend it to somebody who, you know, was raised on and is still playing things like Monopoly and Risk. Not that there's anything wrong with that, even though those games aren't very good, but because, you know, they might not be ready to take that step, where somebody who's been playing a lot of Catan or Carcassonne might be ready to take that next step and look for something really cool.
So I like some classics.
Sure.
And it's hard for me to convince my family to play board games with me.
Yep. Yeah, it happens to all of us.
But okay, good. But I like Scrabble and Quirkle and Jenga and Perfection. We have an old Perfection board. I love those kind of games. That's all that's coming to my mind right now. But we've never done anything. I think we have Monopoly. We have Clue.
Sure.
Clue we never enjoyed.
It's horrible.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
I found it
Really frustrating.
frustrating and like, are we doing it right? Like a little bit. I don't know. I always felt like maybe we didn't know if we were doing it right.
Yeah.
So we like charades and Pictionary, that kind of stuff.
Yep, absolutely.
So I was going to come in and want like something that would excite my family,
Sure.
like some kind, I mean, that's not VR or hoverboards or whatever. Like, what would you try and sell me?
Okay.
My kids are 12 and 14.
Sure. And how many people in your family?
Just 4.
4. Okay. So your best bet is going to be Settlers of Catan, probably.
Think so?
Settlers of Catan as a starting point has an advantage that when you look at the setup of Catan, it looks like a board game. It looks like Monopoly or Risk. It has, big, beautiful pieces. It has a couple cards going on. But the big things about Settler Catan is that it's in the mid-1980s. I'm going to say 86. It's 25 years old now, so I should probably be able to do the math on that. 2020. Oh, 95. No, it's got to be older than that. 35 then. Anyways, whatever. It came across the pond, and Americans were blown away by it because the core mechanics in Settlers of Catan is on your turn, you're going to roll 2 dice. And whatever number comes up will generate a resource on the board regardless of whose turn it is. So if I roll a 6, and the 6 is on a wood tile, whoever is adjacent to that tile will get wood. So if it's my turn, but the two of you, Marshall and Sara, are adjacent to that tile, you both will get wood. However, I might need that wood in order to do a thing. And so I'll say to you, I really kind of need that wood. I'll tell you what, I'll give you one of my clay for your wood. And you'll say, sir, my wood was harvested by dwarves in the mountains of Catan. This is artisanal wood, crafted by hand. You want to give me 1 clay for this? I think not. I will take 2 clay and nothing less. I'm going to say 2 clay, highway robbery. I'll give you a clay and a sheep. And we're engaging in negotiation.
And this is through imaginative play. This is not
This
through
is in the
cards
rules.
that you select.
These are through the cards.
Okay.
This is actually part of the game.
I like this.
And keep in mind that it's my turn, but you're already engaged with me. You have to pay attention to when I roll because anyone can get resources on anyone's turn. And if I need those resources, I might be engaging you in discussing, negotiating, trading. Plus, there's no player elimination. At no point are you directly attacking other players. There's a couple of ways. In the industry, we call it screwage. There's a couple ways to screw other players very politely, just a little bit. Oh, did you need that card there? Oh, I'll just be taking that. Sorry about that. But it tends to be more low-key, lesser direct conflict. And there's no way to eliminate a player from the game. And because there's dice rolling, no matter how badly you play, there's always a chance. Like if I had put my first city on a 12, if I roll a lot of 12s on 2 dice, 1 out of 36 chance of that happening, but it can happen, which means even if I'm playing badly, there's always a chance I can win. Whereas something like Monopoly, usually after the first 3 or 4 turns, you can see the way the game is going to go, but you have to go through the motions because I don't know why you have to go through the motions.
I don't know, because you started.
So
I don't know.
what is the world of Catan? Like, what is it, a fantasy place so that
So
you're building a city?
Catan
You're settling.
You're settling, yeah. It is now currently just called Catan. They dropped the Settlers of back in the mid 2000s. Now just called Catan. The long, complicated story behind that, but doesn't matter. Settlers of Catan is a colonial 1400s approximately European. You've just encountered a brand new virgin landscape, completely untouched by human hands.
Or stolen it.
Not making that judgment call, just saying. In the earlier versions of the game, there is a bad piece that is a thief that was black. And we're not going to talk about that. It just, it happened, and now it's gray, and it's much better. It's much better. We're glad that they did that. But regardless, so you're playing, colonial colonists, basically, and you're trying to build up an infrastructure of Catan. And the person who wins is the person who builds up more infrastructure, longer roads, more settlements, more cities than the other players. And that's basically it. It's a very loose theming. But again, this is the 1980s. The designers, I believe it's Hans Kruger. I'm getting his name wrong. Anyways, the designer was more interested in getting mechanics down pat than he was really interested in making a very rich story. Now, Catan has since had oh gosh, 5 expansions, 12 or 13 standalone versions. So there's a Game of Thrones Catan, there's a Star Trek Catan, there's a Starfarers of Catan. So they've tried to put theme into it afterwards. But the core mechanic, that roll dice, earn resources, trade resources with other players, always stay the same. The reason I bring up Catan is we call it a gateway game. It's a gateway into more board games. And if you were to come to my store, my store. If you were to come to the store, there's an entire wall of board games. I think we have 1,500 games actually actively in the store at any given moment. And 1,000 of those, without exaggeration, exist because of Catan. That when Catan came across, all of a sudden this concept of no player elimination, constant engagement with players,
It's like a springboard to the next level of this style of gaming.
And one of the best things about it is that it always takes an hour to an hour and a half, almost without exception. So
you can get it done after dinner before everyone chills out.
It's the Elvis Presley of video games.
I just wanted to double check what you
board
said.
games. Yeah.
So Catan is a 3. Is that what you said?
Complexity, yes.
Crokinole is a 7.
No, Crokinole is a 7 as like a scale of 1 to 10 of how good it is.
Got it, not difficulty.
Correct.
Okay, that's where I was confused earlier.
Right. No, Crokinole as a complexity, I think, is a 1 or a 2.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's pretty simple. The only real fiddly bit in Crokinole is determining whether something is inside the hole in the middle or not. So
I usually just say that went in and bang the table until the puck goes into the hole.
Yes, the violence rule.
There was a part 2 to my Monopoly question.
Oh, of course.
Sorry.
So I walked away from that conversation because Mark recommended me the Monopoly card game.
Yes, Monopoly
that my
Deal.
Family absolutely loves.
This exists? I didn't know.
It's an absolute blast. And what did they do to take Monopoly and turn it into a card game that is one of the funnest things I've ever played in my life?
So Monopoly Deal, the Monopoly card game, once again...
That's like under $10.
Yes.
Or was when you bought it?
Yeah.
I think it's $9.99 available from your local friendly gaming
Sarah,
store.
if you don't have this is...
No, because I would like to get... I was just looking at our cupboard of games today. I was putting something back in there, and I was like, well, those haven't been out in a long time.
I can't believe how fun that game is.
So Monopoly Deal is a 10 to 15 minute game. I will unabashedly say it is the greatest game ever made with the word Monopoly on it. So 4 out of 10 on the good scale. No, I'm joking. It's a great little game. And another one of those ones where the biggest advantage to Monopoly Deal is that because it has the word Monopoly on it, you put it down in front of people who are like, oh, I don't play board games. You're like, well, it's just Monopoly. Everyone knows how to play Monopoly.
Right.
You know Monopoly. We know Monopoly. And then it turns out that it's also got a really elegant, simple design, which is super cutthroat. 7-year-olds can handle it. Grandparents can handle it. But at the same time, it's really fast. And I cannot stress enough the importance of, if you want to get people who don't play games playing games, speed is often your number one go-to. Because if you can get something done and quick, if they lose, they're like, that was fast. Let's try it again. I think I'm going to win this time.
And so much laughter.
Yeah, absolutely. Monopoly Deal is a really interesting example because I get a lot of people come in again looking for that Monopoly game. And if they're not saying Monopoly, they mean Monopoly Deal. And it's a good one. And, that kind of genre of board game includes things like Sushi Go, which I don't remember if I mentioned or not. But
you did, but I'm not familiar with that one.
It's a simple little card game. It's a card drafting game, which means you are going to have 7 cards in your hand. You will pick one of them, pass the rest of your cards on to the next player, but everyone's doing that at the same time. So we've all selected one card. We've all passed our hand on to the next player, and then we all reveal the card that we kept. So I now know that Marshall is collecting tempura, that Sarah's collecting nigiri, that you both know I'm collecting, I don't know, wasabi, doesn't matter. But because I know Marshall's collecting tempura, this tempura card he wants, this one right here, I'm going to hold on to that. Here you go, Marshall. But of course, he's doing that to you. You're doing that to me.
That sounds fun and fast.
It's a great little game. And because it's fast and simultaneous, you're not waiting for anyone's turn. It's a lovely little game, and it's bright and colorful, and the artwork is super adorable. It's all these sushi that just want to be eaten.
I was going to say, the cover art really stands out. In a wall that's already so colorful, your aisle of games.
Yep.
Sushi Go really stands out.
Oh, it's a beautiful little one.
Yeah.
And coincidentally designed by one of my favorite designers, a gentleman named Phil Walker Harding. He's designed a bunch of just phenomenal games. And it's one of these things where, once you get deep enough into the hobby, we are talking deep pool now. This is not something anybody in their right mind actually has to know. But if you had a larger family, the game I was going to recommend was called Codenames. And Codenames is a 1999 simple little party game, which is just spectacular. Probably the greatest game for 6 to 12 players ever made. And it's designed by my personal hero, a gentleman named Vlada Shavatel, who I'm butchering his name because it's Czech and I cannot pronounce it. Vlada Shavatel. My apologies. But it's spectacular, and it's a simple little party game. Sushi Go by Phil Walker Harding. Phenomenal little 2 to 5 player game for the small version, 2 to 8 players for the big version. Like, these simple little games do such a magnetic pull that if you can get people who are kind of interested in board games to try them out, you got them hooked for life. The problem is, for board game design, is that a lot of the times big name board games are not necessarily great. So going back to Gloomhaven, which is a great game, phenomenal game. But if you took a group of people like your family who are raised on Monopoly and Scrabble, even opening the box of Gloomhaven, you're probably just going to put the lid back on. You're never going to touch it again, right? It would be like someone recommending, oh, I like movies, and they're like, oh, you should watch the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy back to back in a single sitting. Like, no, come on. Like, let's be reasonable.
Although your family does that. Yeah.
But I'm sure your family didn't start with that. Like, that was not the first movie your family watched.
Right.
And so, like, board gaming is the same thing. It's, you have to find an entry point that'll be appealing to you. There's another great game called Splendor, which for up to 4 players, a lovely recommendation. Big thing for Splendor or King Domino, which is the Spiel des Jahres. Spiel des Jahres. There's a hole we could go into. Anyways, is that they're beautiful and that got these big, bright, beautiful, simple colors like Sushi Go. And because it's so tactile, they do half the work of trying to convince you to play the game on their own, because you set them up on the table and your family's sounding like, oh, what you doing there? That looks like fun. You want to teach me? And if you can get that done, you're sold. So the Spiel des Jahres, I want to briefly mention, it's German for Game of the Year, technically Year of the Game, Spiel des Jahres. It's awarded every year. This year's winner is the only exception. Every other year, 2019 back, it's a bright, colorful, simple, phenomenal family game that's really lovely and a great way to get into the hobby. The reason I say this year's is an exception is because the game that won in 2020 is called Pictures. It's fine. It's forgettable. It's not really that well designed or good. But the design team behind Pictures are well-established, good names. They deserve to win an award. I just wish it had been for one of their better games, not this one. But anyways, the Spiel des Jahres in 2017 was called King Domino. It's a great game, really simple. It's kind of like Dominoes or Quirkle. For those of you who aren't aware in your listening audience, Quirkle is basically dominoes using colors and shapes rather than dots and numbers. I don't know why I'm telling you this, Sarah. You obviously know.
It took a little while for me to get onto it. But
so King Domino is the same kind of concept as that, except you have 2 terrains attached to a single domino tile, so like forest and lake or cave and desert or whatever. And you're building a little kingdom trying to have as much of the same terrain touching as possible. And that's it. The whole game takes 10 to 15 minutes to play. When you win, great play, super strategic. When you lose, it was just bad luck. And you just, you rack them up and you set it again, which is great. There was a family that comes to J&J's that I happen to now have as regular customers, great folks. And they were like, oh yeah, we picked that up for Christmas one year. We played it 27 times on Christmas Day, and then we played another 14 times on Christmas Eve because we absolutely had to find out who was amongst us was the better player. And great games do that. They give you an opportunity to engage with your friends and your family.
And you end up talking about it in the downtime, right?
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
like, I'm going to get you on tonight's game. Let's do it. Are you guys going to have another game tonight, right? You end up doing that. Yeah. Does that happen with Gloomhaven for your family?
It does. I was going to ask you, so
of course.
I don't want to consume the last part of our podcast with Gloomhaven.
Sure.
So why don't you just tell the story of Gloomhaven, not in terms of, I know about how it started as a Kickstarter and all those things, and I understand how incredibly the rule book is enormous,
bulletproof.
My wife Sylvia is the one who read the entire thing, explained it
that
to
poor
us,
woman.
and then has to go online to watch tutorials on YouTube. Anyway, Sylvia,
And you guys play. You're into
Sylvia
this
did
game.
that. Yeah.
Okay.
But so why don't you just tell us what the story of Gloomhaven is?
Sure. So Gloomhaven is a role-playing style board game. And so role-playing is roughly broken up into 2 elements. There's the storytelling element. A group of heroes arrive in a town. The town is beset by bandits and monsters. And you, as the players, decide what actions you want to take. That storytelling element is kind of the key aspect of role-playing that really lights the imagination. The other half of role-playing games is you have a finite amount of resources, a certain number of arrows in your quiver, a certain amount of magic in your spell book. You go into a deep, dark dungeon, and you see how much loot you can get out before the dungeon kills you. And Gloomhaven is one of the first games that did a pretty good job, I might almost say a great job, at merging those 2 elements of storytelling role-playing with the more mechanical dungeon delving elements. So Gloomhaven, you have a group of heroes. who've shown up at the frontiers of a brand new fantasy universe. This is not, orcs and goblins and my phone ringing. This is not orcs and goblins and dragons, but a new fantasy universe with new fantasy characters. It's got beautiful artwork, and you're hired by a red-robed woman named Sara, as memory serves, to do a job for her. What could possibly go wrong? And then you decide through kind of a choose-your-own-adventure style element which missions you want to go on, which quests you want to undertake, and your decisions leave permanent, lasting effects on the game. This element of gaming is called legacy games, but Gloomhaven isn't really a legacy game. It's got legacy elements. So every time you discover a new dungeon, you get to put this little sticker on a map, and you'd be like, oh, that is where the Swamps of Despair, never-ending stories. That's where the Swamps of Despair are, or that's where the sunken ship of Veshvala, or whatever, far too many consonants, went down, and we should explore it or whatever. And so these elements of permanency, the fact that this is your map, kind of invest you in the game and in the story of the game, because as you slay monsters and get loot, you also slowly unveil the story of what's happening in Gloomhaven. It's very good. It's very complicated, obviously, but all those elements work together really interestingly. And the combat in Gloomhaven, probably the strongest element of the game, removes a lot of the randomness that we get used to with using dice or things like that by having a deck of cards. And because you have a deck of cards to represent your abilities in combat, in that deck of cards there's one really good result. There's one really bad result. And therefore, if you haven't hit that good result yet, you will soon. Whereas with a dice, you could just keep rolling sixes all day, and there's nothing you can do about it. If you imagine this as a deck of cards with 50 cards, it's 30-something. That somewhere in there's that one good, really, really good result, which still gives you the excitement of you flipped over that one card, you did that amazing thing, you blew off the dragon's head with a fireball or whatever. Everyone cheers. But when you fail, it's like, okay, it still happens. The game is still engaging as a result. It is really lovely, and the storytelling elements are really interestingly done. As I mentioned, my friends and I played it 50 times, which is a staggering amount of playthroughs for a modern game. Now, it's not cheap. It's $139 at J&J's. I think it goes for about $170-ish at most online distributors or at most game stores, which is fine. I would happily pay that much. The real question boils down to whether you want something big and heavy and slow like Gloomhaven, which is spectacular as a big and heavy slow game, but you might get as much enjoyment out of a copy of Betrayal House on the Hill, which I think is $39, I think.
Yeah, Gloomhaven is money well spent, though.
It's 100 unique
endlessly,
scenarios.
And then you can play Frosthaven.
Yeah, and then you can get the new one.
And there's another game here, Mysterium. What's that?
So Mysterium is a fully cooperative game. I mentioned earlier on, Orange Box has the letter O in it. Dixit, obviously. Dixit is a lovely artistic game where you have a handful of picture cards. One player picks one of the cards from their hand, and they comes up with a story with it, a sound, a noise, a word. I'm going to say courage. Everyone else picks a picture card from their own hands, puts it in the same pile. You then reveal all of the cards, and you have to find the card the first player gave the clue for. And you want to make it obscure enough that not everybody gets it, but some people get it. Okay. Mysterium is the same underpinning of a game, but with a plot. One of us has been horribly, horribly murdered and is now a ghost. And the rest of us are playing psychic investigators working together with that ghost to try to solve the murder. So it's a cooperative game. We're all on the same team. We will either all win or we will all lose, which is already, a big step in the right direction. Mm-hmm. These kinds of games are great if you don't want to have, little Timmy run off to his room crying because he lost again. Everyone's working together. That's great. And I don't know if you folks listening to this podcast can tell, but I talk a lot.
That's why you're here.
Yeah.
We don't know the things about board games that you know.
Mysterium, the ghost isn't allowed to talk.
You're kidding.
The only way they can communicate is through this hand of big, beautiful dream cards. And dream cards are obscure and beautiful, but bizarre. So you, Sarah, let's say I need you to guess the chef as having committed the murder. I have to hand you a card that will help you understand that the suspect is the chef. And so I'm going to hand you a card with a fat rat on a checkerboard with a sword and a shield, and I'm going to hope
that you get it from
that you look at that fat rat and you say, "Oh, obviously I'm the chef." Now,
this is what makes it so awesome. This is like
it must be a lot of laughing.
So the joy of the game is, as the ghost, I can't talk, and you are turning to Marshall and saying, "Marshall, I think I'm the chef. Do you think this card means a chef? And Marshall is saying, no, come on. It's a checkerboard pattern on the floor. There, obviously, you're the hunter who's wearing a checkerboard vest. I mean, come on. And our third friend is saying helpfully, no, come on, guys. It's obviously the police officer because it's a dirty rat. You dirty rat. And I'm going insane because I can't tell you what I want. But meanwhile, I've handed Marshall his dream card. I've handed the third player their dream card. And you're all talking together. And these moments of like, I know what Mark meant with this picture, and that's not at all what I meant, but you guessed the right guy.
Right.
Is brilliant. So that's kind of the joy of Mysterium, this opportunity to work together and make the chattermouse like me not able to tell everybody else.
There's nothing else like it. Like just trying to figure out what somebody's trying to communicate to you through this visual. Sometimes it's like incredibly minimal too. It's like the smallest thing. It's kind of like, is that a treble clef? Right? Like just this imagery, and it's like be this big swirling, like some abstract expressionist painting of purple.
Yep.
With like just this little like, are these bricks or you're trying to think. Yeah. Well, how do I communicate this to the person? And
my favorite
I'm always amazed when it works.
Yeah, my favorite thing is like I'm trying to communicate like it's green. And so I've handed you a card that's green. And the people are like, oh, it's got bushes.
Yeah.
And the bushes are shaped a little bit like knights. And therefore, it's probably this person who looks regal. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
No, green.
I think Mysterium
fantastic.
for me awakened me to what these games can be. I brought it home again at your recommendation. Put it under the Christmas tree, and we were like, wow, this is so fun. And we played it with my sister and brother-in-law, and you can tell it's like nothing they've played before. And
Mysterium is one of the very few games I have managed to convince my parents to play. Now, my father is 81 and my mother is 79. They are not into gaming.
And this is a gloomy looking box. It's not Monopoly.
No. And it's one of the big hurdles with board gaming is that Monopoly is relatively expensive, but a lot of board games are cheap. Like Monopoly Deal is $10, and it's a great game for $10. And Sushi Go is, I think, $24, and phenomenal game for $24. Mysterium's on the order of $50 to $60, and that has a lot of sticker shock because people are like, "Well,
it's a board game,
expensive. I'm only going to play it once and then put it back in my closet, and not touch it for 4 years." But you're really paying for experiences. And if you consider Mysterium to be like, going to the movies with, Mysterium plays up to 7 players, and it plays up to 7 players really well.
Right.
It says on the box 2 to 7 players. It's unplayable trash with 2 players. It's awful with 3, but it's really good with 4, 5, 6, or 7. But if you think about like, taking 5 of your friends to the movies, that would cost you easily $70, and that's 1 hour experience. Whereas Mysterium, you could play over and over and over again. Turns out my mom is really good at interpreting my dreams, and my dad is really bad at it.
There you
Who
go.
would have thunk?
I want to ask you about J&J Cards and Collectibles. So I think I'll say it like this. I've been in many game stores.
Okay.
And some of them put a lot of attention, a lot of thought into the creaky wood floors and the lighting and the merchandising and the color. And they have big kites hanging from the ceiling.
Yep.
And they try to make it into a work of art in itself. Sure. And there are magazines that do huge features on the most beautiful toy stores in town.
Sure.
Right? J&J's is not going to be in those
That is
magazines.
not us. Nope.
And yet, do you have any idea on how J&J's does so incredibly well without paying attention to these things in terms of this is not, I'm just saying that J&J's is fascinating to me in the sense that, I couldn't tell you what the color of the carpet is right now and things like that. It's a whole other world when you go in, but it's nothing like other toy stores.
I'm going to say thank you on behalf of Jason and Jim. They work extremely hard to make J&J's into the environment it is. The short answer is the brothers have always been really concerned with making sure that people get the most value for their money that they possibly can. And so they don't spend anything on advertising. They don't spend anything on play space. And play space is expensive and incredibly important. I hope after this pandemic is over that all of the fantastic gaming spaces we have in town reopen. The Adventurers Guild in Kitchener is my personal favorite. Games on Tap just up the street. But the brothers don't do any of that. Their job is to bring you the games at the lowest possible margins they can. And they never run sales. They don't believe in them because they don't want you to feel like you bought a game last week and are upset because it's $5 cheaper this week. It's always the lowest possible price we can. Jason gets a big kick out of customers who come in and is like, hey, can I get this game for $5 off? And Jason's like, I'm sorry, we're running on the smallest margins we can.
Who asks this?
you would not believe. But immediately after asking the question, Jason will be like, no, I'm afraid we can't. They'll be like, oh, yeah, this is the cheapest I've ever found it. And it's just like,
Come on, people.
yeah.
Yeah,
I hope there's less of that.
It's total fair value.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's,
nobody
could ever say.
We do our best. And I will point out, as much as I love J&J's, there are 3 really good game stores in Southern Ontario. J&J's is one of them. 401 Games in Toronto and Meeple Mart in Toronto. They're both fantastic spaces, owned by, I imagine, nice people. I know the owners of Meeple Mart. I don't know the owners of 401. But they're all about the same size, about the same volume. The caveat is that 401 Games and Meeple Mart have warehouses. And J&J's does not. And so we are the smaller of the 3, but the 3 of us kind of keep our prices in check with each other. So you might be able to find Catan $1 cheaper at 401 Games, or you might be able to find Gloomhaven $20 cheaper at J&J's. Like, there's always going to be a check and balance amongst those. And I have no problem with those. And anytime customers come to me and they're like, hey, I'm looking for this horribly obscure game, do you guys have it? I mean, 1,500 games on the shelf sounds like a lot, but again, 150,000 games known of in existence. I mean, we have 1 out of every 1,000, 1 out of every 100 at best. There's a lot of stuff we don't have, and a lot of stuff we can't possibly have. So I will happily send people on to 401 Games or Meeple Mart without a moment's hesitation. And it's one of those things where, like, a rising tide lifts all boats. If people are out there playing good games, that's good for us. That's good for them. That's good for the competition in that sense. Now, all of that stated, the brothers do really well with J&J's by making sure that they have everything. And so when comic books started its decline in the 90s, the brothers were already on to Lego. And when Lego wasn't quite as popular in the early 2000s, they were already moving to board games. Now, board games currently have been rock solid. It is the foundation upon which J&J's has been built, but the store was like the ground was broken because of Pogs. Do you remember what a Pog is?
I remember that.
Yeah.
I was a little too old for it, but like nephews had them.
Yeah, exactly. So J&J's did a gangbusters on Pogs. And I mean, obviously, they don't sell any Pogs anymore because nobody plays with them. There was a period of time a couple of years ago where we were doing fidget spinners. And it was just like that brief, and when I say brief, I mean a summer.
It was a flash.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we sold more fidget spinners than we could possibly get our hands on. And we still have some of them left over, but that's the kind of things that they do. They grab the things, hit them as was the iron is hot, and then convert that into more board games, more Lego, more Playmobil,
Smart.
that kind of stuff.
What's your favorite game right now? And I want to say right now because there's no way for you to pick one, I'm sure.
So I have a top 5.
Oh, bring it on. I'm ready.
The number 1 game, in my opinion, which I do not recommend to anybody, is called Twilight Imperium 4th Edition. It is simply the greatest game ever crafted by human hands. It's enormously complicated. It's 42 pages of rules, which I jokingly say can stop small caliber firearms at close range. However, it's a space opera in a box. And if you ever want a game that doesn't tell you, okay, here's what you have to do to win, but instead asks you, what kind of game do you want to play today? And then molds itself to that gameplay style, that's Twilight Imperium. An incredibly niche recommendation. Once again, $169. Don't buy it, folks. It's phenomenal for very, very few of us.
Is this number 5 of the countdown?
No, that was number 1.
That's number 1.
That's number 1, okay.
Yeah.
Don't buy it, Marshall.
Don't buy it. Number 2 is a role-playing game called Imperial Assault, which is much like Gloomhaven, except Gloomhaven is fantasy, Imperial Assault is Star Wars. It's got laser swords and space wizards. What's not to love? $150, much more expensive than Gloomhaven for its content, and once again, a more difficult recommendation, but I am a huge Star Wars fan, and so therefore it's one of my top. Number 3 is a Vlaada called Space Alert, which is a real-time, fully cooperative game where we all sit around a table and try to keep a ship called the Sitting Duck alive for 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes. Just have to keep it alive for 10 minutes. Marshall, you did remember to push that button so that the screensaver doesn't go on, because if you don't, we're all going to blow up. You remembered? Oh, you didn't remember? We're doomed. Number 4 is a game by Vlaada. Did I mention Vlaada that I like his work? Yeah, it's called Galaxy Trucker. In Galaxy Trucker, we're all playing truckers who are assembling spaceships out of plumbing and then flying that plumbing to a planet that needs pipes, but in the process we're loading our plumbing down with lasers and shields and cargo and engines, and there are swarms of meteors and everything will go wrong, and it is spectacular if you can embrace the chaos of the game. It's really good. And then number 5 is a game called Scythe, which is unfortunately a more complicated game than I wish it was, but it's kind of doesn't do any one thing spectacularly, does a lot of things really well, and it's one of those weird games that fits into its niche really, really well. And on top of that, has some of the most staggeringly beautiful artwork ever in a board game. It's this kind of steampunk alternative World War I worker placement quasi-adventure war game. Sort of. It's by Stonemaier Games, who currently are famous for a game called Wingspan, which is just topping all of the best of sales lists. And Wingspan's spectacular. Scythe was one of Jamie Stegmaier's earlier designs, and it's really good. So there's my top 5.
Are you able to kind of have some idea? People talk about the future of these games and maybe what's ahead in the year. Like, it's almost like you've done such a great job tonight talking about how, Catan influenced all these other games, and then you get to a point where something like Gloomhaven is on the shelf. I remember when I first saw it thinking, holy smokes, that's an expensive game. Are they going to sell these?
Yeah.
Well, they have. Anyways,
so many of them.
Is there something you're seeing right now that you can kind of look ahead and imagine what's ahead?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So there's a great Canadian designer by the name of Eric Lang, who I'm a big fan of. Eric Lang does area control war games. So if you imagine games like Risk, but well-designed and fun, Eric does games like that. And his big push recently has been towards more narrative legacy games. So legacy means that every time you play it, you permanently change the game for the next playthrough. The original designer of legacy games, Rob Davio, says, nobody in their right mind ever buys a pizza, eats the pizza, closes the box, opens the box, and expects there to be a new pizza there. You've consumed your pizza, you've had a great experience, it's time to throw that box in the garbage.
Wouldn't it be a beautiful world if it was that way, though?
It would be a beautiful world. Oh, God. A quick aside, the pandemic has done many things, but I have made so much fresh pizza over the last 6 months. Anyways, so Eric Lang has been saying that, these narrative style games where you're going to have a more tightly focused experience rather than like these constantly resettable games. A lot of the industry seems to be moving towards that because it makes good marketing sense because, you play Pandemic Legacy, a great legacy game, 12 to 24 times, and then you're done with it. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, I'm only going to play it 12 times. Why would I waste money on that? And Eric or Rob Davio would say, well, we've just gotten you to play a game 12 times. Isn't that great? Like, how often have you played Scrabble? Like, Sarah, when was the last time you pulled out your copy of Scrabble?
It's been a long time.
Exactly.
Nobody wants to play with me.
And so a game like Pandemic Legacy, which wants you to come back, and you're like, oh, no, I need to know what happens in the next chapter. The industry seems to be pushing very heavily towards that. Now, the flip side to that is, of course, Hasbro, still a force of nature when it comes to board game design. And they design these constant deluges of just nameless mass market, I'm trying not to swear,
We don't care.
stuff. And unfortunately, there's going to be more and more of that because the board game market, last I checked, was doing as well as like movies and almost as well as video games. Like, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry internationally.
And something like Mousetrap still sells.
Still sells.
Oh, yeah, that was a fun one.
Yeah, Mousetrap.
I don't know if the Game of Life and those games are
It
still
still
around,
sells.
Yeah.
But,
Like,
we have that one, and my kids have always liked it.
yeah.
It's not my fave.
Again, it's not a good design, but it's relative, right? So Mousetrap is not a good game. It's just it's got really interesting components. And if your alternative is playing Monopoly, I mean, if your alternative is being lit on fire, I would still be lit on fire over playing Monopoly. Like, it's such a horrible design. 150 years old, folks. Like, it is just archaic.
Time to move on.
Yeah. So there's still always going to be those trash. And so the real struggle is going to be with all of these new games coming out, how to differentiate them from this massive wave of constant trash. And people who are like, well, Jumanji just came out. There must be a new Jumanji board game. There is. It sucks. Don't buy it. Or like, oh, I just saw the Avengers. Is there an Avengers board game? There is. It sucks. Don't buy it. Like, trying to find these really good games that don't have the big name market attached to them, it's going to get harder and harder. And it's never been easy. So that's why you need board game specialists.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, thank goodness we have you.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice to be needed.
So where can everybody find you online?
So I write science fiction novels, and you can find those at mhquestis.com. It's the name I write under, mhquestis. That's the easiest way to find me. I have a Twitter account at mhquestis. And then other than that, you can always email sales@jjcards.com. And if you have any board game questions, if they're easy, Jason or Justin will handle it. And if it's anything more than the simplest stuff, they will pass it along to me.
And where's J&J located?
230 Weber Street North in beautiful Waterloo, Southern Ontario. It's at the corner of University and Weber. There's a Dairy Queen at the same corner. Just look for the Big Blue Castle. The most common phrase we get from customers coming to the store is, gasp, it's so much bigger on the inside. And from the outside, it looks like a tiny little store, and from the inside, it is enormous.
And full of tons of games.
And full of tons of games. Just geek from one side straight through the other. And I mean that in the most loving, affectionate way possible.
And you find Mark right in the middle of the
right in the middle
aisle.
of the aisle, in the middle of the board game aisle, usually looking slightly bemused and confused as I try to help people as best I can.
Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. Will you come back again and talk to us about your science fiction writing?
Anytime you would like.
All right.
Or I thought we could dedicate a whole episode to why Catan was take away the Settlers of Catan title. And
I think it may be obvious.
I mean, the whole underpinning of racism in board games
Yeah.
is such a fascinating little... board games in general are just a microcosm of the universe in which they're built in. And so
It's nice to hear things are changing.
it's so slowly, but they are changing, which is really, really nice.
Hey all, thanks for meeting us in Bonn Park. Please like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on the platform that you're listening to. And follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Bonn Park Podcast. Original music by Alan Lung.